Alright guys, for this video I want to introduce you to today's exercise and getting started on how you can lay out the inside pages for your book. This is going to tie in with all the research that you should have done looking at some previously created books and checking out their title pages, their chapter titles, how they dealt with the body copy, the size of the fonts, margins, all those little things that I ask you to research before you start this page layout exercise. When you go to the Moodle page, you can go ahead and download this entire folder. Inside of the folder, I'm giving you the instructions for this exercise. Now, one thing to note, these instructions are not step-by-step telling you exactly what to do. They're really more of a guide for getting you started on doing the different parts for your pages. So setting up margins, body copy. This is meant for you to play around and to see what things will do and how they look on your screen and when they're printed off. We're going to be doing a layout for a simple dummy set of chapters. Once you find what works for you, we're going to pick and choose what you like, and then we're going to add those styles to your final book. But this is going to help you determine what will work and maybe what won't work. But just know, use these notes as a starting point, but you can always change up and come up with your own ideas because this is your book and your layout. Feel free to print this off and follow along for the example. In your book, in the folder that you download, you can open up the Page Layout Options InDesign file, and this is what I'm giving to you. First off, if you check out the Pages panel, you'll notice that there are 20 total pages inside of this document. What I've done is I'm giving you 5 different options, and each option covers 4 pages. So it's going to start off, think of this as a chapter start, and then it's going to give you some inside pages for that chapter. Then it'll go to option 2, and you've got 4 pages for that. Option 3, 4 pages, 4, and option 5. So what I want you to do is to come up with 5 different variations to create a chapter title and how you would stylize the text and the opening to the chapters of your book, 5 different options for the margins of your page, for the runners, the headers and the footers, where to place the page numbers and the author. Play around with the body copy and how you can change the size, the font, even the leading, and how that affects the readability of your book as well. And you're going to simply do this for 5 different layouts. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect. Again, this is meant to be the kind of thing you simply start off with and play around. Before I jump into this exercise, let me show you some great examples from last year's book layouts to give you some ideas of what you can do. So for this one, this person chose to lay out their book with the chapter title starting on this page and having the text start on another page. Pay attention to the margins. Notice that the margins on the inside tend to be a little bit wider, and there's usually more or less space at the top or the bottom, depending on where your page number is. They also change up the body copy. So think of option 1 as like chapter 1. Here's the inside pages showing what it would look like. Here's option number 2, and you can see how this is different from the first option. Even how they started off their chapter titles and the placement of their information. Option 3. Different fonts, different treatment, different ways you can play around and use this. So I really want you to stretch yourself with what you can do when working in InDesign, because this is very text heavy, but you can still have some decorative elements as well. Here's another great layout, especially if I go into preview mode. So this person had War of the Worlds, and this is how they wanted to start off an option for their chapters. You can see they're playing around with the placement of the page numbers. Instead of it being at the corners, in this case it'd be more in the center. Or here was a second option, something a little bit more narrow but still works. Again, they're playing around with the placement and the size of their margins. You can see there's a lot of room up at the top. Here's option number 3. They've incorporated one of the pictures from their research or from their packet of information and how they're dealing with the title and placement of this. And I really like the last one. In this case, they took one of the pictures and they did some photo editing to it and have the text running around this. This is an option that you can do as well. And you know, or you should know how to do this in Adobe InDesign. Here's a final set of examples to show you. These are a little bit more subtle, but the same thing. Chapter 1, if you want to change it from option to chapter 1, you're welcome to do that. They've added some simple little decorations, but notice even down at the bottom, the headers and footers have the information down here, and it's got a little bit of decoration too. Chapter 2, and how it was treated. Chapters 3 and options 4. You can see how this was done. Feel free to add lines. Feel free to add any kind of glyphs or images to your design. And then finally here, this one kept nice and simple as well. So this is what I'm looking for. 5 different ways of adding and designing a chapter title and your body copy. So let's jump into the example that I gave you. I'm only going to work through one option just to give you a starting point or some things to think about. From here, you can go through and design it however you want. Here's the first thing that I would do. And again, I'm going to follow along with my instructions that I give you. So in the instructions, the first thing is to set up the margins for your page and how to adjust those margins. Since this is the first option, I'm going to go to my Pages panel, scroll to the very top, and remember, we're affecting 4 pages at a time. So I'm going to hold down Shift and select all 4 of those pages. With those selected, you can go up to your layout, down to Margins and Columns, and here's where we can adjust the margins of our page. Make sure a preview is turned on, and we can unlink all of these right here. This will allow us to add something different in all 4 of these pages, or are part of the margins. From here, I could start to adjust this, and I can tell you, you're going to need more spacing in the center or in the alley of your book, the spine of your book. So I'm going to start on this inside margin, and I'm going to increase this. Notice when I do this, it's keeping my text exactly where it should be. What you need to do, I'm going to set my margins back to where they were. Make sure to adjust the layout and having that turned on. With that done, watch what happens when I adjust the inside pages. Notice that it also adjusts the placement of the text inside of that box. That's very important to do. So maybe for the inside, I'll give it 3/6 of an inch. For there, for the top, I want to have my page numbers and author information, so maybe I'll give it a little bit more spacing. And at the bottom, we'll give it a little bit more spacing down there as well. For the outside, so these are the edges of your page on either side, maybe I'll keep those at 1/2 an inch. Again, you can change these numbers however you feel is best. We're going to print these off and see what they look like once they're finished. We'll say okay to this. Now check out what we've done. We've got our book and it's laid out, and these 4 pages are only affected and they've got their own individual customized margins. The next thing we can do is to add and adjust our body copy. Body copy is simply how are you going to treat the text inside of your page. So let's jump back into here. I'll grab my type tool and I'll select all of this body copy. You can actually go to the second page and hold down Shift and select that as well. With all of this selected, here's some of the first things you can change and move around. Play around with different kinds of fonts. Now, I'll be honest, it's best to work with a serif font whenever you're reading body copy like this. Sans serif fonts tend to not be as readable, so you may want to choose and filter out into a serif font to play around with. Minion Pro is the default font, but there's also Times, there's Bodani, there's Garamond, any of these other great fonts that you can work with to lay out your text. I'm going to choose Bodani just for this example. You can see how this font tends to be a little bit more narrow and compact in, so it's good for having lots of text on the page, but it can be a little bit difficult to read. So the next thing I'd want to play around with is maybe the size of my font. A lot of books aren't set in just 12 points. They can be as small as 10 points. That tends to be a little bit too small. Some go as large as 13 or even 14 points. So anywhere between that range can be good for what you've got. I'm going to set mine back up to, I think 13 points is pretty good for this size of font. And the final thing you can play around with is your leading. Don't simply keep it at the auto leading setting. You can play around with this. Usually anything larger than your font size tends to read very well. So in this case, I can spread it out. Let's do 20 points. And you can see how that gives it a lot of breathing room to work with. Now that may not be what we want. Maybe I'll bring this down just a bit more. Let's see, we'll go, if I had 20 points last time, let's set it to 18. I think that's good for that. The final thing we'll do, again, let me reselect my text just so I don't lose this, is we need to be able to see where all of our paragraphs begin. Right now, if I was to look at my text, I really can't tell where one paragraph starts and another one begins outside of the placement here. So the first thing I would do is to adjust my first line indent. You can find this on the very side of your text box, your text options, and look for this option, the first line indent. Increasing this number will push the first line of every paragraph over just a bit. And again, you can play around with this, usually 1/4 of an inch or give or take can give you a pretty good setting. And now when I'm looking at my text, I can see that the text fits really, really nicely within this particular layout. And I can actually read all of the different paragraphs, and the font looks really good too. So playing around with the paragraph first line indent, the leading, the size, and the font are all different ways of treating your text. A final thing I'll give you a note on is the alignment of your text. Most text is just a regular flush left or ragged right. However, there are some books that like to do a justified left. With this option right here, this allows the book to have solid or straight lines on both sides of your page margins. Now this can work really well, but do pay attention that this will adjust your spacing of a lot of your words, and sometimes it makes it a little bit harder to read. So I'll leave it up to you whether you want to have flush left or ragged right, regular left kind of indentation. All right, so with that, the next thing we're going to do, we've got our body copy, is to adjust the character title options for this. Some things to play around with this are adjusting the space before and after, the placement of that title, playing around again with different sizes, different fonts, different ways to even lead in your words, and some things you can do to create your own unique options for this. So with this one, I'm going to select option 1, and again, we're going to treat this as if it was our chapter title. The first thing I want to do is I want to give myself a lot more space up here at the top. In order to do this, well, let me show you what not to do. Don't simply put your cursor here and hit the return key several times, like that. That's not what we want to do. Now that we know how to use Adobe InDesign, let's do it the correct way. I am going to give myself one return right here, and then I'm going to select my option 1. To adjust the amount of space up and down from here, we can return to our options at the top and click on paragraph. With paragraph, another set of options found in the middle right here is to add space before your paragraph and even space after your paragraph. Oops, set right here. So if I wanted to add some space above this, I can choose space before, and I can dial in exactly what I want in order to get it to move down. Again, keep in mind, I had to hit return at least once before I could dial that in. If I want some space after this, so between my chapter title and my first line body copy, I can add this, and this will place it exactly where I want it to be right down here. So again, let me increase this and also increase this. Now I've got a good working area to place things within my design. We want this to be nice and consistent, so that's why we're dialing it in rather than having to hit a bunch of returns. Now let's play around with the design for our chapter titles. Again, I'm going to go up to my character palette. And this is where I can really start to play around with different kinds of fonts. If you find a font on a website and you want to install it, you're welcome to do that as well. But let's look through and see if we can find maybe a fun font that option 1 can be typed out as. Let's say I like this one, like Zafino. Now if you want, you can retype this. So instead of it being all caps, if I want it to be option 1, and I can type it out in uppercase or lowercase, you're welcome to do that. I'm going to select this again, maybe play around with the alignment. It doesn't have to be centered, so you can have things off to one side or the other. We can make it a different size, kind of like the look of that. Maybe I don't like this number, so I'm going to take away the number and I'm going to place it inside of its own text box. So with this, I'll click and drag, type out the number 1. Let's find a font for that one that gives me a little bit more freedom for how it looks. We'll keep that as Myriad, and I'll make this one much, much larger. Maybe not Myriad. Let's go with more of a sans serif. Let's go back to Zafino. So let's say I like this option, but I want that 1 to be behind my option 1. I'll select it. I can change up the tint of it. By the way, we are working just in black and white. You won't be able to print any of this in color. So I want to keep everything in black, white, or even shades of gray. And now I can set option 1 behind there. Let's see what it looks like as chapter 1. Ooh, that's looking real good with that. So again, you can place text wherever you want by putting it in its own text box, or you can work within your chapter text box that's already there to move it around and play stuff with this. So maybe I'll have chapter 1 setting behind it, and I'll use a line to add some extra decoration to this page. Maybe we'll let the line be much thicker and even a different style. So that's one option for the body copy and even the chapter title. By the way, if you want to preview this, you can always go to the bottom of your toolbox and choose preview mode. This will turn off everything and allow you to see what your book looks like from here. Again, you can return here back to normal mode, and that'll go back to this one. The next thing we want to do is to adjust our headers and footer styles. And keep in mind, these headers and footers are where you can place your page numbers, your titles, your chapter titles, whatever you want to do, and they don't have to be consistent with the chapter title. For instance, let's say I wanted to have my page numbers down here at the bottom. So I'm going to give them a text box. We'll click and drag, and I'm simply going to type in a dummy number for now. So it can be page 1, that's fine. We'll give it a size, and we'll set page 2 off to this side. Again, since it's on my right side, maybe I want to adjust the space, or excuse me, the alignment to be aligned to the right on this side. And let's give it a different number as well. Highlight that, set that to be number 2. So that's looking pretty good. Up here at the top, I'd like to put the author and maybe the book title or even the chapter title if I wanted to. So I'm going to give it its own text box. You can use your actual author or you can make up an author. So let's say this I was laying out for H.G. Wells. I can select that and let's give it its own individual design. Maybe make it a little bit smaller. By the way, you can hit W and this will go into preview mode as well. And I can see what that looks. Let's do the title up here. Again, all I typed in was chapter title, just some dummy text, and you can see how this would look. Some other things you could do, this doesn't have to be set up here. You can have them off to the side, or you can even put them on the other side here. You can have your page titles, or excuse me, page numbers and titles be on this same part. Let's do that for the other page. I'll copy this, so I've got them both selected. We'll copy it, Command C. Let's go to our second page. Don't neglect these inside pages as well. They need to have page numbers and they need to have headers and footers as well. I'm going to put these down at the bottom. And just like I did with the others, let's put our numbers down here. Now in this case, maybe I want the numbers to fit alongside with this. So let's pull this in. I'll make a copy of this one and we'll let this be a different number. So maybe my non-chapter title pages will be something totally different. Pulling the titles up there. Let's put this one on the other side here. Okay. So now I've got one option for how to treat my chapter titles, my paragraph, and my body copy, and even my headers and footers on both of the pages. Going back to my instructions, I've got headers and footers. The final thing we can do is to do some other kinds of layout adjustments. Some things that I would suggest are maybe for the first paragraph, you want to do something slightly different. Since this is the start of a chapter, some other things you can do is do like a drop cap. So I'm going to select this and only this paragraph. With that paragraph selected, maybe I'll get rid of my first line indent, or even better, let's increase the first line indent and I'll pull it all the way over. I could have it starting right here in the center. There's no rules that say I can't do that. Or I can get rid of it altogether. Oops. Type in a 0 for there. There we go. So I've now set that to 0. If I want to do a drop cap, this is where you can use your type tool, select the paragraph formatting, and your drop caps are found right here in the center. Increasing this number will increase the number of rows that your drop cap will be set to. And again, you can also increase the amount of indent that you want for this page or not. Or you can even select this first character, and let's do it as a different tint of black. Maybe I'll set that to be 30% as well. We'll back out. And so there's a good start for this one to work with. Now, since I'm not with you this week, we're not going to focus on printing these off. Instead, I do want you to upload whatever you've done by the end of today to the Moodle page. Even if you're not completely finished, go ahead and save your Indesign file and upload this Indesign file to the class Moodle page so that I can see that you've made some progress on all 5 of your different options. Next week, we're going to print these off. We're going to look and see what body copy works best, maybe what you like for your chapter titles, and then we're going to plug those into your actual book. The final thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to save these as options for you to be able to look at whenever you do the layout for your design for your book as well. So these will give you a starting point. All right, best of luck for this. If you have any questions or issues, please feel free to email me those as soon as you can. Love y'all. Have a good day.